Happy New Year. The beginning of a new year or a new season gives us an opportunity to start afresh. And over the years, we'll see that when the year begins, people make resolutions of what they want to do, accomplish, and maybe new exercise practices and commitments for what they want the year to look like. And maybe things they don't want to do. But history tells us that most often by the time it's March, many of those resolutions are forgotten. Some people don't even remember what their resolutions for the beginning of the year was. So this year, I want to challenge you to something different. What if instead of a New Year's resolution, you choose to live a year on purpose? You choose to live a year for a mission that is bigger than you. What if this year, instead of making a resolution of what you want to do, you instead change your mindset on how you want to live and how you want to be in this world, a life that is lived to its fullest. Follow me as I share with you what I really want to, what I'm trying to say, or how this can be lived out. Church history tells us of the story of countless men and women who impacted their generation. We have people like Catherine Coleman. We have people like Mother Teresa. We have people like John Wesley. We have people like Aimee Semple McPherson. We have countless people who have influenced their generation. Martin Luther, the reformer, who have influenced their time, who have influenced their generation. Most of them wasn't because they made a resolution, but it was because they changed how they wanted to show up in life and in this world. I want to particularly tell you the story of two young men. These young men were part of the Moravians. The Moravians were part of a group of people who were like offsprings, not like biological offsprings, but who were people who came from John Hus, the teachings of John Hus. And John Hus was burnt on the stake because of his convictions and his stance with regards to the gospel and his belief in God. And so these Moravians, about in the 1700s, got birth a prayer movement from amongst them that lasted for over 100 years. But this prayer movement, by the time it was like 5 years in, there were a group of them, two particularly, the entire group heard about these slaves that were being held back, were in this St. Thomas Island, and they didn't have an opportunity for the gospel. So two young men among these Moravians, 5 years in, said, we want to go. But the slave owner in this island of St. Thomas had made a commitment that he would never allow a clergy on his island. Among where he lives, among his slaves, he would never allow a clergy. He said even if there was like a shipwreck and then the clergy found himself in there, he was going to keep that clergy in a separate room until the time when there was another ship to take the clergy away from where the slaves were. So he intentionally did not want the slaves to ever get an opportunity to hear the gospel. So when this news came to the Moravians, two of the men, one in his 20s and one in his 30s, decided to sell themselves as slaves in order to reach the slaves. I think of Apostle Paul says, I became all things to all men in order that I can reach some. So he decides to sell himself. They decide to sell themselves as slaves so that they can reach the slaves. And they go out, and on the day of their departure, here they are in the ship, and their families are there watching them. Their friends are there. The other Moravians are there, and everybody is standing and watching and wondering, is this sacrifice too extreme? Are these two men taking their faith to an extreme that is not normal? But as the ship moved away from the shore, and they stood and they watched their families looking at them, and I think with a sense of wanting to give them hope and letting them know that this sacrifice is not too extreme, they held each other's hands and they raised up their hands and they said, may the lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering. That is amazing. May the lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering. May Jesus Christ, who came and died and laid down his life for us, receive the reward of his suffering. For these two young men, selling themselves over as slaves in order to go forth and reach this other slave wasn't extreme. To them, they were like, the lamb is worthy of multitudes coming to know him. That is part of the reward of the suffering of Jesus on the cross. And so how does this apply to us? How does this impact how we live? What has this got to do with our new year? I strongly believe that as we live into this new season, that God is calling us to be able to, like these two young men, intentionally say, live our lives in the way that the lamb that was slain is worthy of the reward of his suffering. So that the lamb can get the reward of the sacrifices of the price that was paid. And so how can we live that way? How can we live each day with that kind of mission? How can we live each day with that kind of intentionality? I would say the first thing is to live a life that is worthy of God. It's a call to holiness. So the suffering of the lamb is not in vain for those of us who are believers. We want to live in a way that represents God, in a way that honors God, in a way that pleases God, so that his suffering is not in vain. So I would say this year, as you start this new year, what if the challenge is to live each day in a way that honors and glorifies Jesus? The second thing I believe that will make the lamb receive the reward of his suffering will be our intentionality in reaching the lost. For some people, it's going to be going to a further place, leaving your home, maybe going to another country, to another city to reach the lost. But for others, that's not your call. Your call is going to be to intentionally be on mission at your workplace, to intentionally be on mission in your neighborhood, to intentionally be on mission among your friends in your family, so that the lamb that was slain receives the reward of his suffering. But what if not only are we called to be or live with intentionality or go to the lost and preach the gospel to the lost? What if the call is a call to intercession this year, to intentionally pray, and not just to pray for Velma's breakthrough, to pray for the things that I want, but what if I start intentionally praying for the lost that are around me? What if I start intentionally praying for the nations and praying for my brothers and sisters on the front line who are preaching the gospel, on the front line whose lives daily are at risk? What if I start intentionally praying for the church that is persecuted around the world? What if I intentionally lift my eyes off myself and start interceding for a purpose and a mission that is bigger than me, for a harvest that is massive? How impactful will my life be for my generation? But then also, for the lamb to receive his reward, I believe it's a call to generosity. It's a call in this season to give with incredible generosity to ensure that God's kingdom is advanced around the world. For some, God might be calling you in this year to start taking care of some widows and some orphans that you know. And God is going to say, now that's your responsibility. Can you make sure they go to school? Can you make sure that widow has food for she and her children? But it might also be a call to intentional generosity of giving to missions and missionaries and those who are serving on the front line. Or it might be an intentional generosity to start, how can I help to plant a church in a village that truly and genuinely needs a local congregation, a space to worship? Incredible generosity. That is not the ordinary. That is how the lamb gets the reward of his suffering. When we take our eyes off ourselves and set our eyes on a mission that is bigger than us, on God's mission on earth. When these two Moravians left and went to Thomas Island to reach these 2,000 to 3,000 slaves, God blessed their work, and their mission was incredibly fruitful. And several other Moravians came not only to the island, but then because of their first sacrifice and their first step of faith to honor the Lamb, many other Moravians became missionaries all around the world. And they were one of the most impactful missions movement around the world, preaching the gospel, watching lives change, watching lives transformed. This was because of two men who realized that the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross is so much that cannot be taken for granted. They lived a life that left a legacy. And like God is amazing, they didn't die on the slave island. They were going, not knowing if they were going to ever come back. But God blessed their work, blessed their mission. Many got to experience Jesus and come to a relationship with God. But then also God gave them the privilege to finally come back home. And they became some of the leaders in the Moravian movement. So today, how would you live this year? I want to challenge you to live this year on purpose. Live this year, live each day intentionally for a mission that is bigger than you. Remember that the Lamb that was slain is truly worthy of the reward of his suffering. And so let each one of us, you and I, live this year for a legacy. Live this year in a way that impacts the lives of others. So Happy New Year, and welcome to a year that is filled with incredible kingdom impact. Welcome to a year where the lives of multitudes are going to be changed and shaped and impacted because of your obedience to God. Welcome to a year of incredible generosity, of the people who are going to look and have a smile because of how much God is going to use you to bless them with the finances that God has placed in your hands. Welcome to a year of unrestricted obedience to God, to whatever the Lord is going to call you to do. Welcome to a year of living on purpose, a year of living each day for a mission that is bigger than you. And watch and see what God does by the end of the year. You will be amazed and you will wonder about the impact that your life would have had in the lives of many, in the lives of multitudes, and in the life of the people in your generation. We are called to live for something bigger. You don't have to be a pastor. You don't have to be called to go to the front line. But each one of us have a mission. So what if this year we are not going to live for a resolution, but we are going to be a people that are different. People that live differently. People that show up to spaces differently. People that show up each day to the world, knowing that they are on mission. And they want to make sure that each day that they live is to see that mission fulfilled. Let me leave you with this Bible verse. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 18 to 20, I'm going to paraphrase. That was Jesus getting ready for his ascension. He's telling the disciples. He says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and lo, I'm with you always." That is our mission, to go and make disciples. It is our great commission. It is our command. So may we be empowered to do that and do that well. Thank you.